Alright, hey everybody, today we're doing episode 2 of the inventory system. In today's episode we're going to be adding some inventory interactions so you can move the items around in your inventory, you can drop them out of the inventory and stuff like that. As you can see in the last episode we added picking up the items. That's about as far as we got, so go ahead and open up your inventory and we'll get started. Alright, the first thing we're going to do here is just write header, drag and drop, pretty simple, and then we're going to just set up some variables. First one here is public image. We're going to call this one drag icon image. Then we're going to come and create a private item, and then we're going to call this our current dragged item. This is just going to let us record which items we're moving around, where we're moving them from, and stuff like that. Then we're going to want to make a private int called current drag slot index, and we're going to default this to -1. We're going to scroll down to our update function, and in here we're going to add a couple of inputs basically. So if inventory.active in hierarchy and input.get mouse down 0, going to be mouse down as well. Else if current drag slot index doesn't equals -1 and input.get mouse up 0. After this, we're just going to add a couple of vertical bars, and essentially what the vertical bars is, they're sort of separating the if into two separate ifs. So if this situation is met, or if the opposite of the vertical bar situation is met. Current drag slot index doesn't equals -1, and inventory dot active in hierarchy, and we're putting an exclamation mark in front of this. So if the inventory is turned off, but we're dragging an item, we'll put the item back down so that we don't sort of drag it around in the scene, and it'll just look a bit weird because we're not actually in the inventory anymore. So we're going to jump over to our if statement here, and we're just going to do a little bit of code. So we're going to create a new function in a minute, but for now we're just going to write it out. So drag inventory icon, open bracket, close bracket, colon, and then we're going to just copy paste this and just make another one called drop inventory icon. One other thing we want to do actually first of all is make sure that our drag icon image .transform.position is always equals to your input.mouse position. It won't always be visible, but when we're dragging an icon across, we want to know what we're dragging. So now we're going to scroll down to the bottom and we're going to set up these two variables. So first of all, private void drag inventory icon, and then underneath this, just copy paste this, and we're going to just make that our drop inventory icon. So for this first function here, this drag inventory icon function, we're going to just copy and paste our for loop that we have in our add item to inventory code. This is just going to loop through all of our inventory slots. We're going to figure out which one that we have currently hovered over. Copy paste this into the drop inventory icon as well. We might need that, or we will need that later. First of all, we're going to get a reference to the current slot that we're looking at. We're going to just do slot cur slot is equal to inventory slots square bracket I, close square bracket, colon, obviously. This is just going to get our reference to the current slot that we're looking at, so we can figure out if we actually hovered over this, if we're trying to drag the icon, and so on. So if cur slot dot hovered and cur slot dot has item. This function doesn't actually exist yet, so first thing we're going to want to do is go to our slot script, and we're going to set this function up. Public bool has item, open close bracket, and then we're just going to return true if we have an item and false if we don't have an item. So the way that we're going to do this is return held item question mark true colon false, and this just is a bit of a toggle, so it'll just return true if we have an item, return false if we don't. Super simple there. So that is now fixed. There's no more squiggly lines. We're going to come back here, do current drag slot index is equal to I. And this is just going to let us record where we're currently dragging our item from in case we sort of drop the item in a place that we can't actually drop it, or if we want to swap two items. So in case we drop one of the icons on top of a slot that already has an item, that will just let us swap it. Underneath this, we're just going to do current dragged item is equal to cur slot.get item. Another important thing here is we're going to just do drag icon image.sprite is equal to current dragged item.icon. And this is just going to sort of represent what we're dragging around. Drag icon image.color is equal to new color 1111, and this is going to make it opaque so we can actually see it. Whereas when we're not dragging an item, we're going to want it to be transparent so that it's not sort of blocking your view or getting in the way. And that's just how we're going to sort of represent what we're dragging. Underneath this, we're just going to do curSlot.setItemNull so that we remove the item from the slot that we're currently looking at. And this will allow us to sort of move the item around without breaking up the rest of the inventory. So coming over to our drop inventory icon function here, we're going to come above our loop and we're just going to set up a couple of things. So the first thing we're going to want to do is create a drag icon image.sprite equals null. Drag icon image.color is equal to new color 1110, and this will make that icon transparent so we no longer see it, no longer gets in the way. Back into our loop, we're going to do slot curSlot is equal to inventory slots I. Same thing as before, we're just getting the current slot that we're hovered over. So if curSlot.hovered, and then inside of this if function, we're going to do an if curSlot.hasItem. So in this situation, we basically have an if curSlot.hasItem, we're going to swap the items. This means we try to drop the current item we're dragging on top of a slot that has an item already, so we kind of need to swap their two positions. Else, what we're doing is we're just directly setting that item that we're dragging into that slot. So in our hasItem one, we're going to do the swaps first. So we're going to do item.item.to-swap is equal to the current slot.getItem. Basically what this means is we're just getting the item out of the slot that we're trying to drop our currently dragged item into, I guess. A little bit confusing words, but you know. We're going to do curSlot.setItem current dragged item. Inventory slots.current drag slot index is set item to swap. And that's going to move the item that we've just dropped our draggable item into to the old slot where the item we just dragged came from. Then we're going to just create a quick call to a function we haven't made yet called reset drag variables, and then we're just going to return out this function. We're going to set up this reset drag variables function now. So private void reset drag variables. This is just going to go current slot index or current dragged item equals null, and then current drag slot index equals -1. Now over to our else, which is where we're just going to set it directly to the slot because there's nothing to swap around. We're going to do curSlot.setItem, open bracket, current dragged item. And then underneath this, we're going to do reset drag variables. Again, we're going to return out this loop. Now, underneath all of this, at the very end of the function, if we haven't returned out of this function, essentially what this means is that we dropped the icon in a place that has no slot. So in this situation, we're just going to return the item to where it was originally. So to do this, we're going to go inventory slots, current dragged slot index, dot set item, and then current slot item, or current dragged item rather. And then again, we're just going to reset our drag variables. So we're now done with our code for this drag and drop, at least. We're going to come into our scene here and we're going to set up the drag and drop image. So going into your canvas, we're going to right click and create UI image. We're going to call this our drag drop image. And you're going to want to make sure that this image is the same width and height as your actual slots in your inventory. So mine is set to 50, so I'm just going 50, 50. I'm then going to just turn this transparency all the way down to 0 by clicking on color and transparency, and then I'm dragging this into our inspector player there. One thing you might notice is if you are unable to drag your slots, it's because the drag icon image has a raycast target on it. You're going to want to set this to be off so that you're not trying to raycast that image, but instead the slot beneath it. There you go. You can now see that you can move these items around. You can drag them on top of each other and swap their positions. That's great. Now, jumping back into our inventory script here, we're now going to set up dropping items. So underneath our raycast here, we're just going to create a public transform drop location. And this is going to be where we're dropping the items from. So if we hover over a slot and we press a certain key, you might want your item to then fall out of your inventory. So in some situations, this would be like a queue. So that's what we're going to use in other games rather. So if we're going to do if input.getKey down key code and then the key you want to use, I'm using Q, so keycode.q, and then underneath this I'm going to write drop item open bracket close bracket, and that's the function we're just about to make. So now we're going to go ahead and create this drop item function. Come up here somewhere random, private void drop item open curly brackets close curly brackets, and inside of this we're going to loop through our entire inventory slots again. So same mode, for int I equals 0, I is smaller than inventory slots dot count, and then I++. Go ahead and open those curly brackets again. In here we're going to do slot cur slot equals inventory slots I, and then once again we're going to do if cur slot dot hovered, and that's all we need for this. And cur slot dot has item. We're going to try and drop this item. So we're going to do cur slot dot get item dot game object dot set active true. This is going to make our object that we have in that slot actually visible again. We're then going to do cur slot dot get item dot game object, or dot transform rather, dot position is equal to drop location dot position, and that's going to move the item to where we're trying to drop it from. One last thing is we're going to do cur slot dot set item null, so that we update that item, or that slot rather, and then we're just going to break out this loop, and that's it. Going back to our scene here, when they're going to set up this drop location, the way I like to do it is I like to add it to my player camera. So I'm going to open up my player here, look inside my first person camera. I already have a drop location set up, but just for example, I will delete that and restart. All I'm doing here is I'm right clicking, I'm creating an empty game object and dragging it about 1.25 out on the z-axis, and then we're just going to set this in the inspector and we should be able to drop items. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my inventory script, and I'm going to drag that drop location into the drop location transform section. I'm going to go ahead and save the scene, hit play, and walk up to some items and see if they drop. So as you can see, I'm picking up my items, I'm hovering over them, clicking Q, and there you go. The items drop out of the inventory just like expected. And that's all.